Hi there. This is Susan Kokinda at LaRouchePAC. Today is April 19th, and this is the second of a series of podcasts that I'm going to be doing with Brian Lantz on the significance of Donald Trump's Agenda 47 proposals. In our first discussion, Brian and I discussed the largely unknown Agenda 47 proposals, which President Trump has put forward as his agenda if the American people choose him to be the 47th president of the United States. This last weekend, I was at a meeting which was attended by many Trump supporters in the state of Michigan, and almost nobody knew about Agenda 47. That's why we're doing this podcast series. And I hope you check out the first one, which we did on our YouTube channel, and you subscribe to the LaRouchePAC YouTube channel. I don't think the problem is one of marketing. Donald Trump is pumping out these proposals on his website, on Rumble, on Truth Social. I think it's because not enough people are thinking offensively. We've gotten too used to reacting to the enemy's policies. It's like we're being pinned down by enemy fire and all you can do is fire back. But I think President Trump is thinking like a general and flanking the globalists by putting out his own bold new agenda. And he's made clear, these are policies which will replace the perpetual war policies of the neocons and will replace the anti-growth policies of the greenies and the monetarist policies of the Federal Reserve. So this leads to the first question that I want to ask you, Brian.
Sure.
As we developed in the first podcast, one of the most dramatic of his proposals is to build 10 brand new cities, freedom cities in the United States as a way of upshifting our economy in such a way that it's going to lead to quantum leaps in the American standard of living, as he has said. But it might not be obvious to most of our viewers that one of the things that makes this Freedom Cities proposal so revolutionary is that we haven't built any big new cities or medium-sized new cities west of the Mississippi in over 100 years. So I'd like to start today's discussion with the question, what happened? Why did we stop building?
The U.S. was locked down. America was locked down, and it came to us from Queen Victoria and the British Raj in India. McKinley was assassinated in September of 2001. Our President McKinley. Teddy Roosevelt, then, after only a few months in office as vice president, was made president, and he utilized Gifford Pinchot, what today would be considered a billionaire, an American billionaire, to head up the Forest Service. And before that, it was called, he was the chief of forests. Well, this man was trained by Dietrich Brandeis, who for 20 years ran the Conservancy of Forests in the British colony of India for Queen Victoria. And they locked up the forest there. Indians could not use the forest. They couldn't tap the teak. They couldn't use the wood. The major forests were locked up, and the Indian population were locked out. Well, Brandeis left after 20 years, and he brought those policies to the United States through Pinchot, this, like I said, billionaire, who with Teddy Roosevelt then locked up some 400,000 square miles of land in the West. This included 150 forests, not parks, forests. It also includes 5 national parks. It includes 51 wildlife preserves, and you could go on. They locked the place up. So that's first and foremost.
So in other words, this was a step to actually recolonize a part of the United States.
Yes. This was a period of great dynamic industrial development of the United States, coming off of the Lincoln Revolution, the steam engine, and so on and so forth. In combination with this policy, Susan, was the imposition of J.P. Morgan and Company of the trusts. That was preceded by the Species Resumption Act. That was 1879. The Species Resumption Act cut off credit to the West and to the South. The greenback policy of Lincoln died, shriveled up. The trust operations, particularly if J.P. Morgan came in, U.S. Steel was 100 steel companies. It was made into one, U.S. Steel, and you can spell it S-T-E-A-L. And that's, so they locked down the economy. They turned it into a revenue stream for Wall Street and the City of London. And then this created an explosive mix. This was a period of massive immigration to the United States because of the Lincoln Revolution.
Probably a lot of our grandparents came right around
then. Yes. And suddenly there were not the jobs. There were no place to go. You had the filling up of the cities on the East Coast. You had at the same time labor strikes and so on that broke out as a result of these draconian monopolistic practices being carried out. And of course, Teddy Roosevelt was absolutely part and parcel of this. And then you had the spreading, as you know, of eugenics. This was Teddy Roosevelt. Part of Roosevelt's argument was that the white race needed to become more virile again, and they needed to get out in the forests to become more virile. That was the rationale, literally, for promoting or publicizing this lockdown process coming to us via the British Empire.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, I mean, I've looked at this, you've looked at this, but the early so-called conservation movements in Britain and in the United States were directly tied to the eugenics movement, which directly ended up spawning Nazism in Germany. In fact, I remember discovering some early conservation magazine in the United States when I was sitting in the Library of Congress doing research, and their symbol was the swastika. So, you know, I mean, and it wasn't just coincidental. It was very, very conscious. So
this led to a shutdown of immigration into the United States. By 1924, we had halted all immigration into the United States. This explosive mix and eugenics, and that was promoted publicly by J.J. Hell and others that were part of the J.P. Morgan operation.
Yeah.
So no people, no natural resources, no credit, you know, and the economy went to hell. Yeah. And that was the lockdown.
Well, again, that's just why, I mean, I don't think people have an appreciation for how revolutionary it is for Donald Trump to say, we got to end this. Yes. We got to do something different. We got to be bold again. So give us an idea of what's actually been locked up in terms of resources in the West over this last period.
Sure. I mean, and it's still ongoing. Of course, then we have as you mentioned at the start, the greenie policies of the last few decades were overlaid on this. But look, you can't build anything without resources. And non-fuel resources, minerals, are in the Rocky Mountains. They're in the Great Basin. That's where they are. You know, they don't exist in the Appalachia mountains and so forth in the same kind of way for tectonic reasons, the upshifting of these masses of rock and so forth. So you're talking about mineral resources. We're now dependent for imports for over half of 51 natural resources that we use in industry and agriculture. 51. And they're all here. They're all here in the United States, but we're importing them instead. We're not developing the resources we have. Forestry. We're mining 3 billion board feet a year right now in terms of lumber out of our national forests, just out of the national forests. Through the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and the early 90s, it was 12 billion board feet. We've cut it to a quarter of what it was. And then we wonder why lumber isn't available where the price is through the roof. You know, it's a monopoly cartelized operation that's has a grip, and in part through the greening policies. So these are enormous resources. And of course, processing them, bringing them then into the economy would upshift the entire economy. Natural resources includes uranium. uranium, one of the largest holdings of uranium in the world is there on the Colorado Plateau, you know, stretching from northern New Mexico and on up to Wyoming. That's
Brian, I'm actually going to share the screen to give people a sense of this, because I think this is one of the places that you've suggested is an obvious site for one of these 10 new cities.
Yes, yes. You see there the Colorado Plateau, and you see those 4 states. This is the 4-corner region because it's the only place in the country 4 states come together and meet in that kind of way. And you can see them there: Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, Colorado. So you know, this is where our uranium capacity exists, but we only are utilizing 5%. 5% of the uranium for our nuclear power plants comes domestically. The rest comes from outside of the country. It's ridiculous. I mean, you could talk about all the other minerals as well. Coal from Wyoming, copper. 4 of the 5 largest copper mines in the United States are in Arizona. You know, the other one, Kennecott, is in Utah. It's all there, you know, whether it's coal, copper, uranium, iron, the Iron Mountain, besides the one in Minnesota, the Iron Mountain Range there's the Iron Mountains in Utah, which are hardly utilized today. That gives you
I mean, a lot of people, you know, focus a lot on the fact that we need energy independence, and obviously we're not developing our fossil fuels as we should be, and that's clearly a no-brainer. But there's so much more that we could and should be developing.
Yes.
And as you've said, it's not just a question of the extraction, it's a question of the processing. So why don't you give people, let's take this 4 Corners region again, and let's paint a picture of, you know, why you might want to build a city there, and what such a city would begin to do. So I'm going to share the screen again. I'm going to give a different picture. There we go. There's a more extensive picture of this 4 Corners region.
And that's showing you the aquifers. It's they're color coded there, but that's not topological. That's water underneath the surface. That's water available for utilization.
So all those different colors are aquifers. They're not just the blue ones. Okay.
Right. They're all aquifers. Right. It's not measuring height. You know, it's just measuring aquifers. Some are underneath each other too. So this is an enormous water resource. It may not be the ultimate water resource you want to use, but it's an enormous water resource in that region. Now, if you take New Mexico in the upper left-hand corner of New Mexico, where that orange blob is, right there, yes, that's roughly where Farmington is. It's a town of 27,000 people now. It's the largest city in the area, in that whole 4 Corners area. You know, the 4 Corners and the plateau area. It's the natural entry into the Colorado Plateau. The Colorado Plateau is kind of from that orange spot there where Farmington is on north. So Farmington, that area, provides an avenue of access into the entire mineral-rich area of the Colorado Plateau. So a city there, developed there, would be a natural place for mining, mineral processing, uranium, but other minerals as well. But then New Mexico ties in terms of rail lines and so forth. I mean, this Burlington Northern Santa Fe, there's 165 trains a day that go through New Mexico. Farmington, together with the Navajo Indian Reservation, want to build a spur from Farmington down to Gallup, which intersects the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad, because they want to develop the region. They've been utilized for coal, and there's coal-fired plants, but they're all being shut down by the greenies, you know, and the power utility. So they want to develop. So this spur, for which they have initial money, but they're going to need a further investment, would access the Southern Pacific or the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad. So that's an aspect, but also in terms of New Mexico right there, not just, I mean, there's a lot more in the region, but you have the Sandy Labs, National Labs, you in Santa Fe, you have in Albuquerque, you have the other major lab, the Los Alamos Laboratory is in Albuquerque. So you have scientific capabilities in that region. That's about 3 hours drive away from the Farmington area. But you get an idea of what you could develop, not only in terms of a city, but the radiating spokes out from that new city into the region. So I'm just suggesting the Farmington area is one example, one possibility.
I think you also mentioned there's one of the major mining colleges is in Colorado.
Yes, yes.
Which would then feed into this entire process.
Yes, so-called mines, the shorthand version of the name. Yes,
okay.
They're working right now on projects for the moon, for mining the moon. I mean, it's in a very advanced center.
Yeah, you really begin to get this picture of what we could uncork. And in the chat last week, in response to our first discussion, one lady asked, well, what about those of us who own our homes? Would we be forced to move? And, I said, no, this is an opportunity for people to start fresh. Young
people, I think, young families, to build these cities or a string of these cities. And these cities can interact not only with the larger economy, but among themselves. You can imagine them spanning a broad reach from north to south, as well as potentially east to west. So young families coming in to build these cities. And as Trump is emphasizing, we're going to build beautiful cities, beautiful homes, and we're going to create a baby boom. So these cities, the building of these cities, very construction of these cities will be like a magnet, drawing hope, people with hope and with hope for the future to them, and it'll change the whole outlook of the nation.
Well, great. All right, I think we've started to paint the pictures. We have a lot more painting to do, I think, in future podcasts, but I hope that people have gotten the idea in this one. This of necessity reverses the insane green policy. It of necessity reverses the insane anti-human policy. And while President Trump hasn't elaborated as much as we have, it's going to have to eliminate the credit strangling policies of the Federal Reserve and of Wall Street, which will be the topic of a future podcast down the road. So in our next discussion, Brian and I are going to explore what are the implications of what you have to bring in to this region in terms of critical elements of the platform, namely energy and water, to actually be able to build cities on this scale. So thank you, Brian, for today's discussion.
Good to be on.
And we'll see you all again very soon. And remember to go to the first podcast, which is on our YouTube page. You can also go to the LaRouchePAC website. In fact, I think I'm going to do one more screen share, if I can find it quickly enough, and show people our new page, which highlights President Trump's Agenda 47 initiatives. Here is our page on the LaRouchePAC website, Rebuild the Nation with Trump's Agenda 47. It's under the Our Campaigns tab on the LaRouchePAC website. And I certainly encourage people to use that to organize people around this vision for the future. So again, thanks to everybody for joining us. Thank you, Brian, and we'll see you again soon.
Yes, indeed.